What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 231. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today, returning to the show is my Libertarian Institute colleague, Patrick MacFarlane. Pat, how the hell you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, happy to have you on. Sunday here, so we're talking about the cops and, quite a few things. Of course, the Amir Lock story is getting a lot of national coverage and has maybe been the first real round of anti-police protest or police brutality protests in the U.S. since Biden became president. But, we have other important stories and people who aren't getting as much attention but have nonetheless been victims of the U.S. police state. So, very happy to have you here today, Pat. You're the host of the Liberty Weekly podcast, which can be found at the Libertarian Institute alongside the news roundup that I write and this show, Conflicts of Interest. So everybody check out the Institute. Also, you can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. And I bet you could find Liberty Weekly at all those places too, right, Pat?
Yeah, I do have a Rumble account, but I just haven't uploaded everything to it yet.
Okay, but definitely Odysee as an alternative. I know you got a bunch of coins and followers over there, so that's definitely a good place to check out your show. We're both on Facebook and Twitter. The show is at con_interest. Pat, you're Liberty_weekly.
That's right. Yep.
Yep. And then if you want to donate to us, you could do that through the Institute, or we also have our own Patreon and subscribe to our accounts and all that good stuff. Crypto information for this show is in the show notes page, and you could support Conflicts of Interest by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code is PEACE. That saves you 25% when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. They have a great lineup of products at Paloma Verde. They're coming out with a full spectrum tincture, which I'm really excited about because apparently, full spectrum means that it's going to have a little bit of the THC power in it. So very interesting stuff going on at Paloma Verde. You're definitely going to want to check it out and definitely want to try the awesome products they have there. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. Pat, let's get into the show. First thing I want to mention today, or talk about today, is the case of a no-knock raid, and one that's not getting as much attention as Amir Lock, and that is this young man, Tyree Williams, and he was killed sleeping on his couch. So what happened here, Pat?
Well, I mean, it's just basically a kid sleeping on his couch. He hears there's a flashbang that's thrown into his house, and officers see that he has a gun, and so they shot him 18 times, and he died under his blankets even. And it turns out that they went to the wrong house. And this is just a fact pattern that we've seen over and over and over and over again. In fact, it's hard to keep each one straight because the facts are just so similar. And so if you're, a Bible-thumping, gun-toting conservative, at least I like my guns. I'm conservative, or at least that's where I come from. You got a lot of guns. I mean, right behind me, behind my studio here, there's a bunch of guns. There's even some in the studio. So people like that who are in the gun culture should recognize that this could happen to them. You're just sitting there. Maybe you live alone. You're a single man, and you got guns around because you're cleaning it while you watch TV or something like that. You fall asleep. All of a sudden, there's a huge explosion. You wake up. You believe someone's breaking into your house, and you grab your gun, and then they just shoot you down, and it turns out it was the wrong place.
Yeah, and as you said, this is a story that's becoming all too familiar. Now, I guess, Pat, maybe an objection from a gun owner would be something along the lines of nobody does this. And obviously, if you're, sleeping with a gun or something like that, that means you're up to no good. And so, well, the police officers had every right to do this. And actually, the fact that he was sleeping with a gun makes it understand why they did a no-knock night raid and they kicked down his door in the middle of the night, because look how dangerous this young man was.
Yeah. Well, they're acting on bad intel. I have noticed this double standard with conservatives where, Thomas Massey will pose, and I'm not pinning Thomas Massey on this, but he has that picture with a bunch of machine guns for the Christmas card. And that's awesome. And that's praised. But at the same time, if they see a bunch of, black people in urban community posing with guns while they're thugs. I've noticed that double standard, and I guess you could have that argument that, well, the black people, maybe in a gang environment, they're actually using them aggressively. I guess I can understand that. But we should celebrate gun ownership. We shouldn't celebrate criminality, but we should celebrate gun ownership.
Right.
And
Well, and I guess too, Pat, the fact that, most of these people would invoke self-defense as one of their main reasons for gun ownership and the right to self-defense. I mean, like, some of these communities are more dangerous and experience more home break-ins. And so if
yeah,
that's really the case, that this is about self-defense, it seems that maybe some of these people would be more, not have more of a right to own a gun, but have more of a, practical reason to.
yeah. Well, and how do you distinguish just based on a picture who is a criminal and who isn't? I mean, to people living in my town, they see anyone. I mean, if it looks like you listen to rap music, then you're a thug, and that's just not right in my opinion.
Yeah, no, great point there, Pat. And so I guess, one thing that had come up when, I don't know if I talked about the Breonna Taylor raid with you, but I know I covered it on the show with Will, and I'm sure you've talked about it. I'm very familiar with that case. But Rand Paul had introduced a bill called the Breonna Taylor Act to ban these no-knock raids. And I don't think specifically just the ones at night, but it does seem to be more nefarious to, like, it'd be one thing if you raid somebody's house during the middle of the day without knocking, but to do it at night, it terrifies people, and that's the same kind of thing that criminals do, right? Like, I'm sure criminals have, like, broken into houses before and yelled police, right? Like, that can't be some kind of thing that's never happened. And so the fact that when anybody breaks into your house in the middle of the night, that's an issue. And so what else are, I guess, like, how big of an issue are these no-knock raids, and, like, where does the U.S. actually get the authority, the police here get the authority to come and kick down somebody's door in the middle of the night? It just seems like, it's one thing to have a warrant for somebody's arrest, but it's another thing to not even have to, have somebody open the door for you, or to be able to, like, see the person you're looking for through the window before you start kicking down doors.
Yeah, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not intimately familiar yet with the actual, like, the history of exactly how these warrants come into place. I believe you need a special warrant signed by a judge to do a no-knock raid, but I don't know if that's kind of covered under, like, I know that when the police officers write a warrant to a judge and get the judge's signature, it says whether it's going to be a no-knock raid or not. And I just am not familiar right now with exactly how that developed. But I can say that this issue with SWAT teams and no-knock raids, I wrote a paper about it in law school called Just Say No to Drug Prohibition. And so I talked about that. And Radley Belko has done a lot of great work talking about how the special weapons and tactics squads started in LA, and then this explosion, and you get this feedback loop of the military industrial complex. And this really is the war front coming home. We talk about that a lot on Conflicts of Interest, where all this old military equipment and veterans, combat veterans, a lot of the time come back, and they have a certain skill set. So they go into police, they go into policing, they go into SWAT teams. Sometimes they go into private security, but there's also this loop with old retired equipment like MRAPs that get recycled, and grenade launchers get recycled and get funneled into local police departments. And when you have shiny new toys, you like to use them. Otherwise, they just sit on the shelf and collect dust. But the other part of it is I don't have statistics in front of me, but I think it would stand to reason that the substantial majority of these no-knock raids are related to drug crimes in some way. So we see the war on drugs supercharging this, providing the impetus for these raids in of itself, and it just results in terrible policy.
Yeah. And on the military industrial complex and that being funneled into our police forces and everything. There's a pretty good article at the Quincy Institute because Biden signed like an executive order or is planning to take some steps that are supposed to limit the amount of those transfers happening. But as the Quincy Institute points out, that essentially everything Biden is banning doesn't get transferred to police departments anyway, so it's completely meaningless. Yeah, so that's an important point. Oh, and just to mention, as you say, with like the shiny new toys, people trying out and everything, I think we saw this a little bit during the Black Lives Matter protests during 2022, the George Floyd protests, and particularly there was a time in I think Portland, and they fired tear gas from some kind of launcher, but they fired it behind the protest line and forced the protest line to come forward and confront the cops to flee the tear gas. And so, these weapons, you think, what's the harm in giving, an armored personnel carrier to the cops? Well, I guess, maybe nothing in like unless they run somebody over, what is the armored personnel carrier going to do? But they do drive those things into people's homes and destroy homes that way, or so they feel like they got a battering ram, or just, the idea of rolling around in an armored personnel carrier and jumping out like you're in Afghanistan going to take down the Taliban or something like that does add to that, militarized police mentality that, leads police officers not to be like, the good old sheriff that comes to your house and knocks on the door, and if you won't come to the door, he'll call your mama and try to get your mama to get you to come out and things like that, taking this the right way. But no, these are people that come to your home in the middle of the night. They roll up, they run out of their trucks, they have a battering ram, they swing, they hit the door, they see a gun or what looks like a gun, and they just go crazy. Because, again, if they were doing it to the Taliban, then everybody'd be like, hell yeah, get them terrorists. Not knowing anything about Afghanistan, but that'd be absolutely praised. When you have it going on in the United States, it's absolutely horrific. Pat, before we move on, let's talk about Amir Lock, who, of course, is getting a lot more attention than Tyree Williams. I did mention this on the show when it initially happened, but now the body cam footage has been released and there's protesting going on. So, what about this case, Pat?
Yeah, I mean the same similar facts, and actually, when I mentioned the guy dying underneath a blanket, this was the one, because the facts are so similar. It's just hard to keep them straight. And this happened in St. Paul, just a very similar situation. The whole thing happened within 10 seconds. There's an officer turning a key in the apartment door before several officers file in, and then they start to yell in the footage. And I wonder if they got a key from the landlord or something like that. That's a whole nother issue. But yeah, so it says the SWAT team had been carrying out a warrant on Wednesday morning for the St. Paul Police Department's homicide unit. And then the Minneapolis Police Department released the body cam footage. So anything in particular that stood out to you in this case?
No, I guess not particularly. I think it as you said, it's very much like the other ones. It's so quick. I guess one interesting thing to me is just that this is getting more attention, and so again, you never know why, but sometimes what causes protests is always like the Tamir Rice killing, where you think like that would cause a lot more protests and doesn't. Where things like Michael Brown, I'm pretty sure the cop killed, that's murder, but at the same time, like there are conflicting stories and there isn't video evidence of that. Or George Floyd, who is a far less sympathetic character than Tamir Rice, draws a lot more attention. And so I always find that like kind of thing interesting, what generates protesting and everything like that. But unfortunately, I guess I don't really see any movement or concern in Congress to maybe take up Rand Paul's legislation and get rid of this thing, or even like on state levels to do that any more than's already been done. And it kind of seems like the country is already moving on from this. So that's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, and the original intention too, it just makes me think back to that piece I wrote in law school. But the original intention of the Special Weapons and Tactics teams, the SWAT teams, was to go into very complicated, risky situations, like where someone is a hostage primarily, And I'm just thinking of different ways, like if this is really truly a homicide case, then there should be other ways to arrest this person, right? I mean, maybe you have surveillance and he goes to McDonald's, and I mean there's people around, but if you do it right, you could maybe gain the element of surprise and subdue him before anything can happen. I mean, I guess maybe I'm being naive here, but it just seems like there's better situations that you could conceivably take someone into custody. And
Right. So that in the Amir Lock case, they weren't looking for him. They were looking for somebody else who was wanted for a serious crime, a homicide, I guess.
yeah.
And so yeah, like, these are real things that had to be addressed. You can't like just let murderers go free. But I mean, they caught the guy, right? Like it's not impossible to catch these people with a little bit more police work. I think it's just a matter of choice. Would you rather go knock down the door in the middle of the night, or would you rather wait outside his house for a week and basically and also there are laws that prevent like aiding fugitives and everything like that. So if you find out he's in the house, then maybe you could suggest to people that live in the house, be like, hey, look, if you don't want an aid a fugitive, you should just leave the house, or let us, what I mean? Like there are ways to resolve this. And obviously, again, it would be a totally different situation if you did have to carry this. Like, you get the warrant, but you knock on the door, you at least announce to the people that are in the home, like, hey, like, come out if you're not this guy, or if this, you're this guy, surrender yourself. Like, you don't want to get yourself killed. Like, we're in, come in because we got a warrant. And then you go in and things happen from there. At least, then you don't have the mistakes of like, it was just some guy who fell asleep cleaning his gun or sleeping on the couch with a gun and stuff like that, like you've had in these two cases.
And what do you make of the fact situation in the St. Paul case where the police, at least the police say, and I don't know if the body cam footage corroborates this, but they said everyone yelled police very loudly and announced themselves. Does that somehow absolve the officers of fault? I won't say wrongdoing, but of fault.
I mean, I find it depends. Like, if they have body camera footage of them like knocking on the door outside for like a half hour or something like that, that isn't the quite the same thing as just like running into the place. But at the same time, maybe once you knock down the door, then like enter the place a little bit less forcefully. And again, like if I'm sleeping and people start yelling police, like I'm not going to comprehend, oh, the police are here. That wakes me up. I don't hear what they're saying. And it probably, takes people like 30 seconds or so to really, and most people in most situations would be my guess, like 30 seconds to a minute before like they're really going to start comprehending what's going on, and everything like that, and actually responding as if it was the police. And so, yeah, like if you're going to do this, I don't think you necessarily have to like, again, go in like it's a raid against the Taliban and things like that. Also, like just cover the entry points of the house and everything like that. And so like, even if you, again, knock down the door, but then like let people come out, there's no reason to go in all hot-headed like that. But I guess it would change the story some if they really were out there like banging on the door for a half hour or something.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier I thought was a good point, is that in neighborhoods where crime and drug crime is very high, you said that it would stand to reason someone who wasn't the police would break into a house and yell police. I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well,
But
and
go ahead.
for a while I was working with a job where I was like kind of like a social worker, and I had a client of mine who was pretty mentally ill. But he would always bring up to me that like he couldn't own a gun, and he lived in the highest crime neighborhood in the entire state. And he was like, if anybody like I like, and he was well aware that like people with mental illness are far more likely to be guilty of violent crimes than to commit them. Like, and so you do have this dynamic where like we support gun ownership except for the people who are most likely to use guns in self-defense.
Yeah, and before I forget, I wanted to point out this other parallel, which is that to American militarism abroad is acting on poor intelligence. And it seems like when you have, I don't know, what was it, like 80,000 SWAT raids one year? Does that sound right? I don't want to, make
No,
it a big.
that sounds about right.
Okay. Well, when you have all those SWAT raids going on, chances are there's going to be a percentage of them where you're acting on bad intelligence. But then again, there is human error too, where they do have the right house in the warrant, but it's dark outside and police officers aren't familiar with the area, so they just pick the wrong one. That is just bound to happen. And I think that the point to drive home is that just because they have a badge on or they're part of the group that we call the government and that we give certain rights, it doesn't make fallible humans infallible. Just designating that power and authority to them doesn't make them perfect. They're still the same humans that we are in the private sector.
Right. People get lost in my apartment complex all the time. Can't find the right buildings, and the numbering's real confusing. And a lot of these things do seem to have been in apartments. But let's talk about more the SWAT raids here, Pat. We got an article from Reason by Fiona Harang. A SWAT team wrongfully raided her home. Now cops say footage from the raid is private since no one was killed. Tell me you really don't have to have somebody in your home shot to get the footage of the cops brutalizing you.
Yeah, right. Well, I guess the silver lining is that the attorney for the family could see the footage, right? So what happened is that in May 2020, a SWAT team busted into the Raleigh home of a North Carolinian family. Yolanda Irving had the family with her 5 children, and does it look like she's a single mom?
That was kind of how I read this story,
Yeah.
but I'm not. Maybe the father just wasn't home or
Yeah.
is out doing something else.
Well, so the SWAT team rifled through the home for 2 hours and took like all the kids, the 5 kids, and her into the main room at gunpoint while they rifled through the house. And they had the wrong house again. And I mean, this really just makes me think of the American Revolution. I mean, the dangers of a standing army that our founding fathers warned us about. And you have a situation where the police are acting like an occupying army. They come in and, I mean, this kind of situation sounds a lot like when I had Scott Spalding on to talk about his time in Iraq. He's rifling through people's houses at night, lining them up in the living room with their hands over their heads, looking for weapons caches or any kind of intel or certain person. Now, he told me on his second deployment is when he started having ideas about, wait a second, are we the bad guys here? And I don't know how these officers who are doing this, they justify their actions, but based on the fact that they're looking for, I don't know, was it drugs in this case? But I wonder if they stop to think about exactly what they're doing to people when they did it to the wrong people.
Yeah, it's always crazy. With some people, they really like, and I've done this before, like left my job because I felt uncomfortable with what I would have to do. But all the time you hear police officers say, "Oh, this makes me so sick." But you're ruining people's lives and you keep doing it anyway. So maybe it doesn't make you as sick as you say.
Yeah.
And there is maybe a very disgusting kind of deep down like enjoyment of the power it gives you over other people. Or I guess a lot of people do kind of just get stuck in their jobs and feel like they can't leave, and it'll hurt my family and this, that, and the other thing. It seems impossible when you're actually like doing things that you would identify as being wrong. Not just like I'm wasting my time, my boss is a jerk, but these people are actually committing crimes.
Yeah, well, something a little bit more benign is just that my dad was a firefighter for most of my life. For 25 years, he was a volunteer fireman, and part of the thing that you see in volunteer fire departments, especially, is there's a certain amount of like pride that you have wearing the pager and putting it on your hip. And I'm sure the adrenaline of going out, like getting called and coming in, then you get to put the siren on and like speed down through the town, and then you get in the fire truck and you're driving it and you're honking, and you get to go down the street and everyone sees you, what a good job you're doing. And in a small town like that can be very intoxicating for
I'm
for
sure for anybody, even like a big city,
Yeah.
You see cops driving around sometimes, and you're like, you really need to be going that fast there. Like, I'm pretty sure I know what's going on in this town, and I don't think there's anything going on that requires you going that fast and things like that. And yeah, so that, I don't know, it just, it seems interesting that, yeah, that's probably a part of it too, where even if there are things you don't like, the rewarding part of the job, even if it shouldn't be that rewarding, at least for the cops, firefighters differently, but at least for the cops, that's that probably does like keep them coming back to it. Anything else on this? Like, so, I read a lot of these stories, Pat, where if it seems to me that, like, if the cops came and went to the wrong house, then at the very least whatever they destroyed they would have to fix.
You
And
would
that,
think.
and the police department would probably like have some kind of policy, like where the next day they sent like a professional cleaner to the home because they know those cops came tracking through dirt and mud all over the carpet, and just threw everything around, generally made a mess of things. But it seems like most of the time they don't do that. They repair none of the damage, and so people literally either can't live in their homes, or like they don't have locks on their doors. If the cops come and kick down like your door and break the door jam out, that's a fairly intricate fix. A lot of like people can't do that themselves, and hiring a contractor is expensive. It might not be, probably isn't covered by your homeowner's insurance. Like, hey, State Farm, the police came and knocked down my door. Like, what do? They say deal with the cops. Like, that's not covered by your plan. And so now you have no lock on your door. Maybe you can't even live there, and your house is a absolute disaster. I mean, this has to be horrific.
Yeah, yeah. I can't imagine, really. I mean, the qualified immunity of it, and then even if there wasn't immunity for the police, like they do this all the time, and I've seen this as a legal justification in opinions. There was I just did on my podcast, I talked about a challenge to the New York mask mandate, and they're talking about the First Amendment jurisprudence, and they're talking about religious exemptions, and as a part of it, they say, well, you don't have a First Amendment claim unless the law actually like singles out religious beliefs. If it's facially neutral, or if it's neutral applicability, and it doesn't single out people of religious belief, then strict scrutiny doesn't apply. In that case, it's just rational basis. But they say that if we applied strict scrutiny to something that incidentally affected a religious belief, well, we couldn't do all these things, like, we couldn't institute a draft, or we couldn't have minimum wage laws, or we couldn't do all these things that as libertarians we think are horrible. So
Right.
they'll use this justification, long story short, just basically saying, if we did have liability for this, well, then we couldn't do this thing, because all of the liability would be way expensive. All the lawsuits would just be overly cumbersome. So it's like, okay, well, you just made the argument for us.
Yeah, that's a libertarian solution if I ever heard one, Pat. We can't do it because the liability would be too expensive. Well, fantastic omission by the government.
But
Uh,
but then it's the taxpayers on the hook, even if there is liability, so there's no good outcome.
yeah, that's a real problem, especially because I've never heard anybody, be like, "Oh man, I wish we could afford more snowplows, but the police just killed some kid and we had to pay out $3 million, and so now our town doesn't have the money for." Like, nobody complains about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially on the government level or the local government level, people just don't know about the town finances. And I guess, like, if we're talking about bigger cities, or some of these states have their own funds, then probably even less so, because it's probably more of like a rounding error when you're talking about bigger places. But yeah, I'm sure like towns really do suffer like from the lawsuits that get filed against police. But at the same time, like, at least somebody's paying, so at least maybe then there's some interest in accountability. It just never seems to be the case. But can
Yeah.
you imagine if a cop would have to pay pay himself for it? Like, that would be maybe a real game changer for what police are able to do in this country, because like they just would have to stop no knock night raids. It's not that, oh, police would get sued every time they do one. Yeah, they would, so they wouldn't do it. Problem solved.
And if you talk to one thing that's been brought up has been like each officer has to purchase their own individual liability insurance to do the job. And if you talk to a lot of officers, like I know good officers, a lot of them they'll say, well, I mean, put yourself in the situation of the police officer. And I think this is a good thought experiment for us to do, is to try and think about it from their perspective, at least in the cases that are like, close, where it's like, well, was it reasonable what they did from our perspective even? But if you think about it that way, where's the argument from the police officer's side? Why shouldn't they just argue that they're being asked to do too much? Is there any thought about maybe as a society, the state has become so interventionist that we're asking our officers to be so proactive and to do so much that we're needlessly putting them in harm's way all the time. I think that, I don't know if that argument has been presented to them or if they would agree with that, but
I mean, I would guess that, like, if you look at other cases, though, when there's not the immunity that the officers have, that people do, like, are put in uncomfortable positions on their job, and some people go along with it, even if they think it's illegal, but other people will quit and not do it.
yeah.
And my guess is that the more likely you feel that you're going to have to suffer from it, or like face consequences from it, the more likely you are to like not participate in it. And so
Or
that's probably a part of it.
I guess even just to participate, but to mitigate your risk in your involvement. And
Right.
maybe you're smarter about not putting yourself in certain situations. I mean, on the Tom Woods show, at least, we've talked about Detroit Threat Management Center a lot. And it's unfortunate because they've kind of beclowned themselves on YouTube with these fake self-defense videos. Have you seen those? I think, well, the Detroit Threat Management Center they're a private security firm that started doing like a lot of police work
Dale Brown, right, is the guy's name.
I believe it is. Yeah. And so, I mean, at least it was heralded and marketed as being a solution to inner city crime, because you have private security firms that are handling all these very dangerous situations without anyone getting killed or people not really getting hurt, because they de-escalate in the right way. And what I'm referring to, Kyle, I guess you haven't seen it, is that they have had all these self-defense videos on YouTube now that kind of sound like, I don't know if you've seen Napoleon Dynamite. There's that wrestler guy who does the class, and it's just a joke. Like, if you use these tactics, you're going to die. And it's just they've kind of laughed it out, and it makes me feel bad.
Yeah, but the overall point of like private security, like, if you're a private security and you're like, I saw some kid I thought was dealing drugs, so I chased him down, then I saw something shiny in his hand and I shot him.
Right.
Well, that's probably not going to go as well as when you're a cop who does that. And look, I know I'm not like saying that 100% of the time that means the person's going to be held responsible. But even if you did like look at the George Zimmerman case or something like that, he was put through like far more of a trial than what 95% of cops who shoot kids are in very similar circumstances, or probably, less so, because how many times like do kids actually land a couple blows on the cops before they start shooting. And so like not saying he didn't he didn't go to jail or anything, but still, like, I would imagine that that's a pretty strong deterrent in itself. Like, it's just having to go through what Zimmerman went through or something. Like, even if whoever killed George Floyd ended up getting off, like, I don't know if anybody was like, oh boy, I want to be Derek Chauvin today. Like, it's still probably a pretty bad deal. Let's move on now and talk about this very scary thing that I read about in The Verge. FBI used Geofence War in Seattle after BLM protest attack, new documents show. And apparently this isn't the first time it's happening, but I think it may be the first time I'm covering on the show, Pat. What the hell is a geofence warrant? And how come when I passed civets in 10th grade, they told me that warrants had to name a person, a place, and what the officers were searching for? And so how can you have a warrant that doesn't name a person?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kyle. So what exactly happened here is that a geofence is, I think it's something that Google does, where they can track all Android users and like their number or their IP address from who was in a specific location at a specific period of time. So in in this situation, there were a couple BLM rioters who threw Molotov cocktails at a Seattle police department, and there was, I mean, there wasn't really any damage that happened. One exploded above like a staircase, like a concrete staircase, and the other one hit the sidewalk outside and went out pretty soon after. But regardless, what the FBI has done is that they have subpoenaed Google to provide them with all the cell phone data from the entire city block that occurred on that day. So they're going to be, and they got it, and they were looking through all the numbers and the data to see if they could corroborate any of their suspicions with any specific person, is kind of how this article frames it. But what they're going to do is that they're going to, I mean, in effect, what I believe they will do is that they're going to surveil everyone who had a phone who walked in this geographic area that day.
Wow. And so I think it did give a time. It was like a 1 or 2 hour time frame that they were going to get everybody in this area. And Google apparently did comply with the warrant here, which is like kind of problematic for me, right? I would really prefer that they would like try to fight it in court or something like that, because it seems like there should be, again, a pretty solid case, to bring, if it had to go that far, to the Supreme Court that says like, hey, this warrant doesn't have all the things that a warrant should have on it. And so I guess, a couple things seem problematic here to me, Pat. The first being is that, like, let's say, I don't know, some 16-year-old like was going out and his mom gave him the phone or something like that. Then they would have a right to surveil her phone because her phone was in the area, or it seems like a huge issue to just be naming devices and not people. It'd be one thing to have the surveillance camera footage, I guess, and maybe this is what they argued, like it's just a different kind of surveillance camera that they're offering, but it seems really different here.
Yeah, one thing that people really kind of, I guess, you don't realize until you either work with the law or have to deal with a situation like this, is that just because it says something in the law or says something on the Constitution, that doesn't mean it automatically, there's a magic wand that you wave that prevents misconduct or anything like that. So in this situation, you really need someone that, of course, there's judicial safeguards, but when a judge signs off on a warrant that, is questionable, what you really need is the adversarial process, which is an attorney challenging that, a third party, a party to the cause, to the case, that's adversarial, which would be, you would think, the lawyers from Google, who in theory would like to stick up for Google's rights and the rights of Google's customers not to have their data shared with police. So, but, we know Google's origins, and I think, we could talk about DARPA and stuff like that, but they're in bed with the government. I mean, they get all these tax write-offs and everything. So
yeah, I just want to mention real quickly, I don't think there's any reason to view Google, most tech companies, most social media companies, Facebook, YouTube, as not all that much different, and certainly assume that they are going to act with the same exact incentives as the military industrial complex. And I think companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft are and should like do a good amount of business with the Pentagon, could really be considered military industrial complex companies. And so we're looking at Google and saying like, oh, if we're talking about Lockheed Martin, I think you would absolutely see the issue here.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, I automatically assume, that my data with Google is not secure. I'm an Android user, for God knows what reason, but I just hate Apple products, man.
Well, I mean, I get it. And honestly, like, I don't think there's that much more reason to trust Apple over something else. And look, even if they really wanted to, they'll go to third party sources like some of these Israeli spyware companies and look to use that spyware in the US that could crack through all the different encryption and everything like that. They could hack into your phone without you even clicking on a damn thing. just getting a missed 1 second call on WhatsApp is enough to get you. And so there's a lot of reasons, I guess, to just think all of your data really isn't going to be secure anymore. But at the same time, Pat, I guess part of the problem with that is it should be, right. Like, our government, the way our Constitution, the way the United States of America was set up, was specifically to ensure that we have these freedoms. Now there can be different societies. I'm not saying that everywhere in the world has to be like the United States of America or anything like that, but these are things that we should really push our government on. And I think secure communication, secure data are all things that we should have. And I guess the unfortunate thing is I don't see really an option right now. I guess that there is a world where there was a company that, look, these people didn't screw around, and if they got one of these warrants, they would absolutely fight it with every last dollar that they have. And yeah, then hell yeah, I would go over to that company. But it doesn't seem like there are many better options. I guess, let's say, Pat, I wasn't there, never been to Portland in my life. Just want to say that before I say this. But let's say I was there that night and I had an Android phone and I was walking around. Would I now be able to hire you to represent me in any way, or do you really, is Google kind of the only party that could even challenge this?
I mean, you wouldn't be a party to the case. You could hire an attorney who would, like a criminal defense attorney, who would just watch out for you and see, advise you of your rights and things like that.
But I couldn't hire a lawyer or hire the ACLU or something like that. Like, if I had the money to really go after it, could I force the government to delete my data?
That's a good question. First off, I guess, well, I don't know how you would know that you were implicated unless the FBI talked to you or something like that. There might be able to. You might have a 1983 claim.
What's a 1983 claim?
That's just deprive of your constitutional rights, deprivation of rights case.
Okay. All right, so there is an avenue to, I guess, challenge this, although it would be pretty difficult. Google really is the party that should be pushing back here, but it's not like nobody would ever be able to challenge it in any way otherwise. There may be some, my civil rights were taken, and so I guess it would be interesting, if you did go to a protest and you, I don't know, I might leave my phone at home, to be quite honest, and just bring some kind of other recording device at this point. But let's say you were there and you did find out they had this warrant, maybe you could be somebody that challenges that. That would be interesting, at least something different. Any more on the geofence warrants, Pat?
No, I don't think so. I mean, aside from just, it reminds me of protests in Minneapolis. When I lived in St. Paul, there was I don't know if you remember, Kyle, the I-94 riots, or there was a protest on the main interstate going through the city, and there was a lot of things being deployed there, like sound cannons and facial recognition technology and stuff. And I think that's where things are headed.
Yeah, that's really concerning. Just want to mention quickly, I don't want to go into the whole story, but there were two senators, Ron Wyden and Heinrich, who released a thing calling on some kind of memo or press release calling on the CIA to release more information on his bulk data collection program. And so I don't know, it doesn't seem like they're actually saying what they know and why they want it released, but the fact that two senators are saying it, and look, Ron Wyden's not any kind of real radical or anything, although he is okay on this issue, but it is just worth keeping an eye on, that there may be some major bulk data collection program that we really don't know about right now. Pat, before we wrap up, interesting story here from Netsgov, which I think is a pretty much U.S. government-run website. And so I feel like this is a little bit of an official press release, but at the same time, nonetheless is interesting. U.S. spy chief warns government is classifying too much data. And this is Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, saying that overclassification is harming national security and erodes the basic trust that our citizens have in their government. Well, yes, obviously this is the case. Pat, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm actually going to turn it over to you. What you know more about these officials than I do. What can you tell me about Avril Haines?
I mean, I assume she's fully embedded with the establishment, and I think that this is maybe um, just something that the Biden administration has talked about increasing transparency and things like that, and that we need more transparency. I don't think Avril Haines is talking about doing anything radical. However, this is maybe the kind of thing that we could capitalize on, and I do think it's important to know about, because if you're talking about this and somebody says, come on, you could fire back, well, Avril Haines, the current director of national intelligence, even says that this is a problem. And I believe this did come after two senators sent her a letter, so it wasn't like she was just on a thing. Oh, this is something that I'm interested in, I want to increase transparency. But at the same time, again, I do think it maybe could help to shift or open up the Overton window a little bit on this issue, which is really important. I mean, so much gets classified, and then any release of that data is a violation of U.S. law, which is the biggest problem. That you could literally hide your secrets behind and your failures behind classification.
Yeah, and it always shocks me, because over the years, especially when I was in college, uh, the Snowden leaks came out, and I know that Snowden said a lot of things that Russ Tice and William Binney had already released before Snowden did. But it always amazed me that Snowden would go on like national television programs and say like, yeah, the government has your dick pics, that to me, my understanding is that the government has the ability to collect all of your text messages and phone calls in real time. And this was kind of a slip up when someone gave an interview on a big news program after the Boston bombing, and I think he was FBI or something like that, saying, basically implying very strongly that if the perpetrators talked on a cell phone anywhere, then they'd be able to listen and know in real time. And I just don't know how people aren't more outraged about this, especially people on the left, who they believe. I mean, they believe in this theory or this myth of like undermining our democracy, that a democracy has to be transparent and open and doing all these things. But I mean, I just don't see them talking a whole lot about state secrets like this. And how can a democracy function in their view of the term if we have the secrets pervade everything?
Yeah, no, it's one of the bigger problems I think that we do face. And Pat, imagine how I think we get called conspiracy theorists far less if people knew what the government was hiding. And just like a full declassification of things that no longer need to be classified, like the Timber Sycamore program in Syria and things like that, where it's pretty obvious that they use classification to hide failures and things like that. Also, now we could look at the bombing, the suicide bombing outside the Kabul airport at the Abbey Gate that killed over 150 people. There's still a lot of questions. The Kabul doctors are saying that we know that there were definitely people that were shot in the head and neck. We could tell the difference between a ball bearing bomb and a bullet, and we are sure that these are bullets. And the U.S. government is saying nope, that there was nothing there. Well, let's declassify it all. Let's see what's happening. And look, if there really was just one guy who blew himself up and nobody else shot anybody and everything, I'll be more than happy to say that on the show, because I don't really particularly want my government to have to, like, it's unfortunate that these people died, right? Like, that's never going to change. They're dead, but I would hope it wasn't my government that did, but I kind of think that it was. Anyways, the point being in all of that, Pat, was that if they just had a real declassification policy, we would know the truth by now. And we don't, because they're hiding it, which makes me suspect even more that they're behind it, and I think gives credibility to that argument.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this before, but also just the fact that Avril Haines, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, is saying this just makes me suspicious of what her motives are in doing that.
Yeah.
Like, do I believe that she, is a champion of civil rights? I find that doubtful, to
Right.
say.
No, that's maybe the great point to wrap it up on here, to stay like kind of paying attention to this issue, maybe she is going to declassify something. But I would assume that if it's coming from Avril Haines, it's not the groundbreaking things that we want to know about. It's not information on the torture program, which we only got a few hundred pages of that report, or anything like that. It's just going to be official government leaks about how bad are the Taliban in Russia and Putin and North
Right.
Korea and China and all those kind of things. And so, fear that that's going to happen. But at the same time, again, if you're talking about this issue and somebody's, kind of mainstream is like, come on, dude, what do you think they're hiding? Be like, well, even the director of national intelligence said that, we're probably classifying too much. And what are they going to say? She's crazy? So,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Well, this is why we need Julian Assange, and why we should all be supporting him.
Absolutely, yeah. Free Assange. Wrap up there. Pat, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Everybody, check out the Institute. Liberty Weekly is one of the great shows that we have there. Pat, you just mention what you want, plug what you want before we wrap up here.
Yeah, libertyweekly.net is your one-stop shop, and I get more views on Odysee than I do on YouTube, so definitely check me out there.
Oh, that's impressive. Congratulations.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Pat.